So we're getting to the point now where we're very soon going to start on a practical exercise. So the idea is that you will, in groups, start to go through a process of, sorry, I should be using this, of starting to think about and design the whole process of planning a communication product or activity yourselves. The idea of this is that ultimately, I hope you will go back to your organisations and do exactly that. I think that's why most of you are here, because you want to engage in some kind of communication activity and plan for it. And what we'd like you to do is do that and then tell us how you're going along the way. We're already connected in a WhatsApp group. You can get feedback. And 6 months down the line, tell us, where are you up to? Have you achieved this? How far along are you? And so on. Okay, so the idea is actually to produce something. So now what I'm going to do is just go through a few more elements of planning a communication product or activity. And then we're going to split into 4 groups and start planning something together. So it might be something that one of you might, or more of you, might be able to take back and take further, or it could just be a generic exercise that is of interest to you and you might end up doing something else. But it's just the process of trying to think through all the stages that is the purpose. When you're starting a communication activity or product, what's useful to do is go through the process of doing a needs analysis. We need to think about evaluation. Usually what people think about in terms of evaluation is at the end of, once you finish doing something, you evaluate it. You figure out, was it successful or not? Ideally, what you do is start the evaluation at the start. This is called formative evaluation. At the end, then you do summative evaluation. You reflect back. And ideally, you'll also be evaluating while you do the activity as well. A couple of years ago, I was one of about 8 partners, I think, on a multinational one-year project to produce a critical minerals report on the combined critical mineral potential of the Nordic and Arctic countries. Not specifically a communication project. It was run by the Finnish Geological Survey, coordinated by them. And that was the first time in 2 decades of international projects that I experienced that the project manager evaluated the project and the success of the project during the project. During the project, about halfway through, they conducted some short interviews, just short, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, with each of the partners to gather their opinions on how things were going. What were the obstacles? What were the problems? What was going well? And if you evaluate your project while you're doing it, you will be in the small minority of people who do this, but you'll gain important feedback. And it does take more time, but if you plan for it, then it's not that hard to do. Okay, so any evaluation should be linked to your aims and objectives. You need to have a clear idea, a clear definition of what you're doing and what you want to achieve in order to figure out whether you've actually achieved it. Okay, so there are 2 reasons for evaluation. The first is to improve what you're doing. The second is to improve what you're doing. This happens before and during, and it's called formative evaluation. The second reason is to prove that what you've done has been successful, or figure out where it hasn't been, to show whether your aims and objectives have been met. This provides evidence of impact, and it can be used to inform future activities. So this happens at the end, and it's called summative evaluation. So improving practice, proving success. Okay, so again, evaluation is ideally not something you just do once and forget about. There's a reason for doing it, and it's better to think of it as a cyclical process. You start at the beginning, try and do some during, and do it again at the end. So as I mentioned, you need to know about your aims, objectives, outputs, and outcomes. What are these things? Right. Your aim is the overarching goal of the whole thing. What is the overall change that the project is trying to achieve? The objectives are the methods that you're going to use to achieve those aims, and I'll give some examples in a minute. The outputs are related to the objectives. These describe in detail what exactly you will produce or do to achieve your objectives. And finally, the outcomes are related to the aims, but in more detail. While the aim is one overarching goal, your outcomes are the more detailed description of the changes or benefits or learning that the project will foster. So here's an example related to landslide hazard. So you might have as your aim in this scenario to increase awareness in local communities about landslide threat. It might be to foster dialogue with local communities. So in this case, your objectives might be so the methods by which you're going to achieve this, to partner with local authorities to identify communities that are at risk. It might also include partnering with local authorities and communities to develop tools to inform about landslide risk. You might want to engage remote or hard to reach communities to raise awareness. These are all objectives. Outputs. Okay, so this is more in detail exactly what you're going to do or produce to achieve these objectives. So you might carry out an online survey followed by 6 in-person workshops with the local authorities to identify those at-risk communities. You might deliver a mobile phone-based tool for sharing information about landslide risk. You might decide you're going to have 10 community consultation and dialogue events that will reach at least 300 people. This is to raise awareness. And these are all quite specific things. So outputs are specific, and you can easily say whether you've done them or not, whether you've been successful. You need to be able to measure whether you've been successful. And here's another one, engagement of 10 community representatives to deliver local informational feedback. Outcomes, so related to your aims, but more specific about this. So increased engagement of local authorities in landslide risk planning, increased community awareness of landslide risk, increased community engagement in landslide risk management. The more specific you can be about all of these things, the easier it's going to be for you to be able to analyze this later and figure out whether you've actually done what you wanted to do.
Yeah, which part of this you can place your key performance indicators?
Yeah, that's what I think too. Outputs are very specific, so this is something very measurable that you can say, I've done this, or I only did 8 here, or I did 12. So it's quite easy to be really specific about this, I think. A good way to start is to do a needs analysis. This is an exercise which is carried out at the beginning, ideally with participants or representatives of the participants who are going to be involved in your audience. You would use any available literature you can find about that audience, what their needs are. For example, their requirements, context, agendas, constraints, background, any previous experience of a given audience. So this is the part where we're really trying to understand our audience. You want to research and read about other similar projects that might exist that consider the same topic, that have worked with the same audience, that have used the same methods. I know this sounds like a lot. You need to frame this in the context of how many resources you have, how much time you have, of course. But the more you can do on this kind of stuff, particularly at the start and particularly engaging with your audience, the more likely you are to succeed. If there's no literature that you can refer to, you might consider face-to-face analysis. You might try and engage with representatives of your audience just to get a bit of a feel to start with about what they're thinking about, how this is likely to play out. It could be a simple meeting, or you could be inviting representatives of that audience onto the steering group of your project, for example. Like, for example, the PanAfGeo project has an advisory board of stakeholders who have a good understanding of the situation to advise on things that the project, people carrying out the project might not have thought of. So you get an idea of your audience first, then you start considering your aims and your outcomes. What kind of change do you want to achieve? Think about what else is happening, who else is working in the same area, so that you avoid doing exactly the same thing as somebody else. Can you work together with another group that's doing something similar, or learn from them, get feedback from them? If you're able to have some kind of collaboration or at least consultation with other groups who are doing similar things, then you might be able to achieve greater impact for your activities. You might be able to share initiatives or communication campaigns. You might be able to share resources in time and money. And at the very least, maybe you'll discover that you're not going to completely redo something that's already been done. All right. And this is helpful for your audience as well. You know, if they've already had an experience where they feel that this has been done before, or they've had a bad experience, you need to know about that so that you, it's a positive experience for your audience and not something that they find frustrating. So this needs analysis phase will help you prioritize your stakeholders for your engagement, put your activity into context, think about your audience and their needs, and also think about others working in the same area. All right? Summative evaluation is usually conducted at the end to sum up its effectiveness. And this usually focuses on impact. But again, it can also provide you with lessons for the future, how to do things better. And this table summarizes for some ideas for summative evaluation. Most commonly, these are questionnaires or evaluation forms, but there are lots of other interesting and useful methods that you can use, which take more or less time. And importantly, it's of course wise to make the evaluation proportional to the size of your project, both for the sake of yourself in terms of how much time you have to put into it, but also the people who you're gathering the information from, you know, to make sure that it's not overly inflated and it's going to be a real burden for them to take part. All right, in terms of giving people a form at the end to fill in, which is what we're going to do, by the way, there are some issues with this approach. First, you're only capturing what people thought at the end of the event when they've not had a chance to reflect. And that's actually why we're going to let you take it away and think about it. All right? They haven't had a chance yet to actually do something with what they've learned or heard. So it's useful to give them that time to reflect. And often for evaluations like this, people will give short answers. Yes, no answers are not likely to give you very much information. So again, asking more open questions can be quite useful to get more feedback. But then it's also more work to process that information. Interviews or focus groups could be appropriate. There are all sorts of other ways that you might be able to more creatively think about how to get feedback from people. Okay. So, important in the overall consideration of evaluation, both formative and summative, is the idea of reflection. It's often the case that people are so busy doing communication and public engagement, they end up with little time to reflect and think about what they're doing. But if you want to be a better communicator, use your networks to get feedback and try to continually reflect on what you're doing to figure out whether you're actually achieving what you were trying to achieve. An important point is that two people, for example, two people in this room might have had exactly the same experience but learn very different things from it, take very different things away. So it can be useful to work together with a team to get reflections on your communication activities, to get different kinds of responses and input. I think I mentioned earlier, personally, I'm still involved in meeting from time to time with the group who were students with me doing a master's course in science communication. And I still learn from them and get different ideas about how to do communication. Everyone has different perspectives. So this is just one more table that you might find useful to think about the different levels at which you can reflect on your communication. So at the very basic level, you might report on what you've done. The next level of engaging with reflection is responding, having some kind of feeling, thought, or judgment about an experience. The next level of reflection is relating, connecting to an experience to something else, identifying something that could be changed. The next level of involvement in reflection is reasoning, exploring deeper explanations and understanding of the experience, the connections between different personal experiences, the literature, the experience of others, and thinking about alternatives for the future. And the final stage in reflection in this particular model is reconstructing. So you're internalizing what you've learned and incorporating change into how you're planning to do this kind of work in future. So just some ideas about trying to engage more deeply yourself with how you think about communication can be really useful. All right, we are now going to start on a exercise which will take us about an hour. And what I suggest is that when you feel like a cup of coffee and something to eat, go and grab it, but bring it back in here and continue. All right? And this is what I'm proposing we do. We split into 4 groups. And I'm putting up here 4 different ideas for a starting point for a communication activity or project based on some of the thoughts that you shared yourself through the WhatsApp group about what you're interested in. If you have a completely different idea that you want to explore, that's fine. You can raise that as an alternative. And these are not all the same kind of category. For example, a social media campaign, it's a method, right? Okay. Promoting geoscientific data sets, this is about the what, this is about the message. But these are some of the things that you expressed an interest in. Outreach and public engagement, or engaging with policymakers. So I'd like you to think about what you're more interested in, and hopefully we'll get a reasonable split into 4 groups. And those who are interested in thinking about geoscience data sets, I'd like you to sit down here and gather together. Up in that corner over there, people who are interested in outreach and public engagement. Over in that corner, people who want to think about engaging with policymakers. And down here, people who want to start thinking about a social media campaign. Okay? So if you could first do that, we'll see how the split is,